Welcome to the world of tech and coding. Let's build something amazing together with behardikjoshi.
Hey everyone, let's just dive right into this. If you are looking for the absolute ultimate cheat code to pass the Microsoft Azure AZ900 Fundamentals exam, well, you've landed in exactly the right spot. We are going to break down everything you need to know so you can walk into that exam room feeling completely prepared.
Real quick, here's our game plan. We're tackling this study guide domain by domain so it maps perfectly to your exam syllabus. We'll hit cloud concepts, core architecture, compute, storage, databases, governance, security, and cap it off with a high-yield cheat sheet.
All right, so what are we actually talking about when we say the cloud? Simply put, cloud computing is just the on-demand delivery of IT resources over the internet, and the kicker is the pay-as-you-go pricing. Instead of buying your own clunky physical servers, you're essentially just renting them. And Azure, that's really just Microsoft's version of these cloud services, offering honestly over 200 different products. Now, this brings us to a literally guaranteed exam topic, the financial shift that the cloud brings. You've got CapEx, or capital expenditure, on one side. That's the old school way, dropping massive amounts of cash upfront on physical data centers. But on the flip side, you have OpEx, operational expenditure. This is the cloud. It's totally consumption-based. You only pay for exactly what you use. Basically, the cloud takes IT from a super rigid CapEx model and transforms it into a highly flexible OpEx model.
Okay, let's jump straight into Domain 1, Cloud Concepts. These are the foundational rules everything else is built on.
So you've got to understand the shared responsibility model. And honestly, the easiest way to think about it is like pizza as a service. With infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, you manage the most. It's like buying the raw ingredients and baking the pizza yourself. You handle the OS and apps, while Azure just takes care of the physical hardware. Then there's Platform as a Service, PaaS. Here, Azure manages the underlying servers and you just bring your data and apps. It's like getting a pizza delivered. And finally, Software as a Service, SaaS. Think Microsoft 365. The provider manages the whole shebang. You literally just sit back and eat the pizza.
Moving right along to Domain 2, Core Architecture. This is the heavy lifting, where we explore Azure's physical and logical blueprints.
Okay, Azure's organizational structure is a super strict hierarchy. At the very bottom, you have your actual resources. Think of a single virtual machine. Now, every single resource absolutely must live inside a resource group. Those resource groups then roll up into subscriptions, which act as your billing boundaries. And finally, at the very top, you've got management groups to govern multiple subscriptions. Oh, and here is a massive exam tip for you. If you delete a resource group, you automatically delete every single resource inside it. Boom, gone. It's actually a really fantastic way to quickly clean up test environments.
When we look at the physical architecture, we start with regions. These are geographic areas packed with data centers. Azure pairs these regions up, and they are always at least 300 miles apart, just to ensure business continuity if a massive natural disaster hits. Inside a region, you've got availability zones. These are physically separate data centers, complete with their own independent power and cooling. Here's the critical distinction they will test you on. Regions protect against massive, large-scale regional failures, while availability zones, they protect against a single data center failing within that specific region. Still in Domain 2, let's get into compute, storage, and databases. We're going to focus heavily on exactly when to use which specific service here.
So, scaling. This is how your application handles sudden, crazy spikes in traffic. Vertical scaling means scaling up, like beefing up an existing virtual machine with way more CPU or RAM. The catch? You have to restart it, which means, yep, downtime. Horizontal scaling, on the other hand, means scaling out. You are adding more instances of the exact same VM alongside your current ones. If you use Azure VM scale sets, you can add these new instances totally automatically, without a single second of downtime. It's an absolute game changer. Now, Azure offers a few different storage flavors. Blob storage is your go-to for massive amounts of unstructured data, like images or backups. File storage gives you fully managed network file shares, and disk storage acts as the actual virtual hard drives for your VMs. Table storage? That's for NoSQL structured data. But listen, the one I really want you to underline is queue storage. Queue storage basically holds messages for asynchronous processing. The exam absolutely loves to test this. Queue storage is perfect for decoupling microservices so they can all work completely independently.
Okay, brace yourself for a dense data drop, but it is super important. Storage redundancy. Azure keeps your stuff safe by making copies. Locally redundant storage, or LRS, makes 3 copies inside one single data center. Zone redundant storage, ZRS, takes those 3 copies and spreads them across 3 availability zones. Geo-redundant storage, GRS, bumps it up to 6 copies spread across 2 completely different regions. And geo-zone redundant storage, GZRS, is kind of the ultimate combo, spreading those copies across both zones and regions. The big takeaway here, as your protection scope expands from a single data center out to global regions, your guaranteed uptime skyrockets from 11 nines all the way up to 16 nines of availability.
Databases, you generally have to pick between relational and non-relational. Relational databases, like Azure SQL, use a very strict schema. Think tables, rows, columns. For the exam, definitely remember that SQL Managed Instance is your easiest, smoothest lift and shift path from an old on-premises SQL server. On the flip side, we have non-relational databases. Azure Cosmos DB is the absolute star of the show here. It has a super flexible schema, and it's custom-built for global, planet-scale horizontal scaling with crazy fast single-digit millisecond latency.
Let's transition over to Domain 3, Governance and Cost. These are the guardrails keeping your environment efficient.
I'm telling you, it is incredibly easy to mix these 2 calculators up on the test, so pay attention. The pricing calculator is what you use to estimate the planned future costs of Azure services you're just thinking about deploying. But the total cost of ownership, the TCO calculator, that is specifically used to estimate the actual savings you'll get by migrating your existing on-premises infrastructure over to Azure. Make sure you firmly pit these 2 against each other in your head, because they are notorious exam trip-ups.
Governance really relies on 3 main tools. First, Azure tags. These are simple name-value pairs used for organizing your stuff and figuring out billing. Second is Azure Policy, which you use to actually enforce compliance rules, like, say, making sure nobody can spin up a VM in an unauthorized region. And finally, resource locks. These prevent the accidental deletion or modification of your resources. Okay, write this down, massive exam tip right here. Resource locks completely override role-based access control. That means even if a user is the absolute top-tier owner of a subscription, there is literally no way they can delete a locked resource until that lock is explicitly removed.
Moving on to identity, access, and security. Protecting the cloud is just as testable as building it.
One of the most foundational security concepts you absolutely need to nail down is the difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication, or authn, simply asks, "Who are you?" It verifies your actual identity using credentials or multi-factor authentication. In the Azure world, Microsoft Entra ID is what handles this identity check. Authorization, or authz, asks a totally different question. What are you actually allowed to do now that you're inside? This is handled by role-based access control, or RBAC, which is what actually grants or denies your permissions to specific resources.
Modern cloud security leans heavily on the zero trust model. The motto is basically never trust, always verify. Azure pulls this off through a defense-in-depth strategy. It's like a giant puzzle of security layers, so if one layer fails, the next one is right there to stop the attacker dead in their tracks. We're talking tools like Defender for Cloud for your overall security posture, Key Vault for locking down passwords, and Sentinel for threat detection. Oh, and for your network defense in depth, keep in mind that ExpressRoute acts as a private, dedicated physical line straight to Azure, whereas a VPN gateway is just an encrypted tunnel that travels over the regular public internet.
Okay, final sprint. Let's hit the AZ900 exam cheat sheet for those high-yield mappings.
Let's do a rapid-fire service mapping, because you'll definitely see this. You need to know that Azure Virtual Machines are for sure IaaS. Azure App Service, SQL Database, and Cosmos DB, those are all PaaS offerings. Azure is managing the underlying servers for you there. Now, for your compute integrations, you need to explicitly distinguish between Azure Functions and Azure Logic Apps. Azure Functions are for custom code-first serverless compute. Azure Logic Apps, on the other hand, are strictly for low-code or even no-code visual workflow automations.
All right, here is a massive, highly testable insider secret for you. When it comes to blob storage, the archive tier is by far the absolute cheapest place to store your data. Sounds great, right? But wait, it requires a process called rehydration to move that data back to a hot or cool tier before you can actually read it. And that process, it literally takes hours. It is not immediate, so do not let the exam trick you on that.
So look at that. You've got the definitions down, the architecture makes perfect sense, and you know exactly what the security guardrails are. All the pieces are totally in place, you have the knowledge.
But honestly, passing the AZ900 is really just step one. The real question is, what are you going to build in the cloud once you finally have the keys? Trust your preparation, go absolute.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to behardikjoshi for more videos on tech and software engineering concepts.